Again, like the other speakers, want to thank you all for your contributions today. I found them very engaging, and especially Dr. Rosalie McDonough. I think what you're saying there, and Sinead has mentioned it as well, that by speaking to people with disabilities, rather than somebody representing you, we're going to get a much clearer picture of what's needed, and that's so important. And we were talking earlier about inviting guests into our committee in the coming weeks. And I think it is important that we have DPOs, like the disabled persons organisations, people, as somebody said to me during the week, an organisation of disabled people rather than an organisation for disabled people, and that's what's really, really important. I mean, many people have mentioned here a change in mindset, and absolutely a change in mindset is needed for all of us. We all need it. I mean, there's many standards there and different legislation, but it's not enacted, it's not regulated, or it's not monitored. I mean, we've had the Disability Act since 2005, and we've had, different regulations around, building, and they just aren't ensured. It's not ensured that buildings are accessible. I think the IWA had a survey there, and they're saying 77% still feel that certain buildings are inaccessible. We also like online systems with the use of technology are used much more, and I suppose never more than during COVID, right? But it doesn't suit everybody to use an online system. And again, I had somebody who has a visual impairment saying to me they needed to use the phone, but people weren't answering the phones in public services because they were working from home and the phones weren't being monitored or weren't being transferred. So I think we need to continually think about including everybody, and we don't do that. And that's what's important, and that's what this committee needs to do. I mean, a lot of the points have been made, and I agree with them, but there is a couple of questions I was going to ask. And one is around education, because I was a teacher before I was elected. And I'm just wondering, what is the delay in the EPSAN Act being fully ratified or fully used? Because I mean, you talk to parents of young children, and they know maybe they have a learning difficulty from very early on in their lives, or they realise, or maybe the teacher realises in the school, and they go to have an assessment, and an assessment takes years unless they have the money to pay for it. Then when they do get the assessment, whichever way, then they go to access maybe whatever therapy is needed. It could be speech and language, it could be occupational therapy. And again, it's another waiting list. So, and then parents, and then, of the children, the young children, or as they come into adults, they say they have to fight for everything all their lives, and they shouldn't have to. People should be entitled to whatever needs they have, and we know that the earlier interventions can be made in some cases, the better. And the other one I would be concerned about is the moving on from congregated settings. Like, it was supposed to be that by 2016 we would have closed our congregated settings, and then that was moved out to 2021 to reduce by 1/3 and to ultimately close it. And I mean, there's still 2,000, or according to HICWA, almost 3,000 people in congregated settings, and that's not counting all the young people in nursing homes. So I'm just wondering, I mean, how long is that process going to take as well? Thank you.
Just in relation to a couple of the points you raised, Deputy Tully, particularly around education. I mean, the Education of Persons with Special Needs Act is not fit for purpose. I mean, it's outdated, it needs reform, and it needs to be reformed based on consultation with people with disabilities and their families. It needs to look at each individual's potential rather than the educational setting that they're being put in. So that's really kind of, again, it plays back to this whole mindset shift and really looking at it differently. In terms of why it's delayed and why legislation is delayed, I can't answer that except to say that we are as frustrated as you are with that. I mean, the miscellaneous provisions bill, the disability bill, was due for commencement and then died with that particular practice in 2016 and never came back on the legislative programme again. So, it really is up to this committee to get that pressure on all of those different pieces of legislation. In terms of congregated settings, I mean, we have used our legal powers over a number of years in relation to people's dignity and other rights in institutional settings, in particular in respect of the rights of wards of court and around the distinction between voluntary and involuntary detention. I mentioned OPCAT, for example. That's a very important piece of legislation to commence the optional protocol on the Convention Against Torture, because that allows us, again, to be appointed as the national preventative mechanism. And somebody mentioned earlier, I believe it was Deputy Siri Carney about that, again, looking at issues before they arise and identifying them before they become issues. And that's what OPCAT would allow us to do, is to look at where people are or don't have capacity themselves to decide whether or not they're being held in an institution, and allows us to monitor their rights and make sure that they're not going to be in any way transgressed. So those are some of the things I would say around congregated settings. I mean, there's significantly higher death rates for people with disabilities related to the higher rates identified for vulnerable people living in long-term care settings, including nursing homes. So this is absolutely a vital issue that we look at.
Yeah, Doctor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. We were struck by the IWA survey ourselves this morning, and just to note that the Minister has just asked the National Disability Authority to develop a code of practice for accessible public buildings. The impact of this is that it will again provide practical guidance to public bodies as to how they can make their premises more accessible to persons with disabilities, and monitoring. We would have a monitoring role in that respect. So again, it is about measuring and demonstrating performance in that regard that can hopefully drive change. I think we all know public bodies are very well-meaning, but it is sometimes the need for practical guidance that can help. In relation to education, while the Epsom Act is overdue for full commencement, there are developments within the system and increased investment from the Department of Education, which we would welcome. And I suppose some of the things like the school inclusion model are showing a new approach to providing supports so that children can participate in mainstream education. So even though the Act itself is not commenced, there is work underway, and we would welcome that and advise its continuation while awaiting.
Chair, if I could ask you, I don't want to get too convoluted, but there are two things I want to say. One is in relation to the UNCRPD. If the committee sees it as a kind of scaffolding, yeah, of disabled people's public and private life. So that would be the domestic, how we live our lives, how we get educated, and then how we interact with building and whatever else. But I would also ask the chair to please note under the Education Act, hundreds of traveller children who are diagnosed to a high level of having special needs are then removed from classrooms and told to go home at 11 o'clock in the day. So I ask you, in all fairness, what's all that about? You know, I mean, when we talk about an enriched syllabus that is both supportive and challenging to all our children, I would argue children with disabilities, regardless of their impairment or condition, need the stimulation and the challenge of a robust education and a full day in school, not some notional idea from the 1950s that you go in the morning and you go home. You know, that's not on, Chair, and that's why we need the Act legislated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right.